Dana Calloway had earned every stripe on her uniform through grit, discipline, and an unshakable moral compass. As the youngest female police chief in the state, she had become a symbol of strength and balance, admired by her peers and feared by criminals. She didn't believe in shortcuts or luck. She believed in preparation and control. Her public life was impeccable. Her speeches were poised, her decisions calculated, and her leadership rarely questioned. She was the kind of person people trusted to show up when things got bad. In her presence, people felt safe. But safety can be an illusion, and sometimes, the biggest threats don't come from the streets. They come from behind closed doors. Michael Calloway, her husband of 12 years, seemed to be the perfect partner for someone in her position. He was an architect with a polished image and an effortless charm. At social events, he mingled easily, always knowing just what to say. Friends described them as the power couple, two successful professionals who had found stability in each other. Michael would often surprise her with flowers at the office, bring lunch when she was stuck in meetings, and even learned the names of her officers. On paper, he was the dream. But in reality, something about him had slowly started to unsettle her, even if she couldn't explain why. It began subtly. Dana started to notice how often Michael left the house late at night. He claimed to be working on urgent projects, meetings with clients who only had time after hours. At first, she accepted it. After all, her own schedule was unpredictable. But then came the small things. Receipts for gas stations nowhere near his job sites. A cologne she didn't recognize lingering in the car. Disconnected glances when she asked about his day. Even the way he hugged her felt different, like the warmth had been rehearsed. She dismissed the signs. She had to. She was the chief of police, and if she allowed herself to think something was wrong in her own home, what did that say about her instincts? About her judgment? She chalked it up to stress, convinced herself she was overthinking. She told herself that marriages went through seasons and not to let her professional suspicion bleed into her private life. Still, the unease remained, hovering in the corners of her mind like fog refusing to lift. Despite her doubts, Dana kept her routine. Morning runs, briefings, community meetings. She smiled when she needed to, gave orders when she had to, and kept the tight ship she was known for. But deep down, something had changed. She no longer looked forward to going home. The silence in their house became louder than ever. Conversations were reduced to logistics, groceries, dry cleaning, schedules. The intimacy they once shared had quietly evaporated. Then came the early dismissal from a meeting that would change everything. She returned home mid-afternoon and found the door unlocked, which was strange. Michael never forgot to lock the door. She stepped inside, calling his name, but got no response. As she moved toward the kitchen, her eyes landed on his phone vibrating on the counter. It was face up, unlocked, screen glowing. She never snooped before, but something instinctual drew her closer. She glanced at the screen just as a message popped up. It read, "She suspects something. Be careful." Her pulse spiked. Her hands felt suddenly cold. She stared at the phone, willing it to make sense. The words were simple but chilling. The person on the other end knew about her. That message wasn't meant for her to see. It was a warning. A signal that something had already begun, and she was steps behind. That moment was the first fracture in the life Dana thought she had. What had once felt solid now felt like thin glass under pressure, ready to break with one wrong move. And so with the same precision she applied to solving crimes, she decided to investigate the one unfolding in her own home. Dana didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed beside Michael, staring at the ceiling, pretending to be calm while her mind worked like a crime scene analyst sorting through evidence. Every past conversation played back in her head, now with a different tone. Every late night call, every shift in his behavior, it all started to connect. The message on his phone wasn't just a one-off moment of poor judgment. It was a signal that something deeper and more dangerous had been brewing right under her nose. She couldn't confront him directly. Not yet. Not without knowing exactly what she was dealing with. The next morning, before Michael woke up, Dana slipped into her office and began to plan. She had access to resources, but she couldn't use official channels. This couldn't show up in reports. She couldn't risk a leak. If it got out that the chief of police was spying on her own husband, it could ruin her career, whether the suspicions were valid or not. Instead, she relied on tools from her early years on the force: discrete camera systems, GPS trackers, simple, reliable tech. She installed small motion-activated cameras in their living room, garage, and home office. She also placed a tracker beneath Michael's car, hidden in a wheel well. Every step she took made her feel both sick and justified. Over the next week, Michael's behavior seemed unchanged. He smiled, laughed, cooked dinner like always. But now, Dana could compare his words with his actions, and the differences became stark. He would say he had a late client meeting in the city, but the GPS showed him parked near a storage facility in a remote part of town. He told her he was headed to a construction site in the West District, but she tracked him stopping at an upscale condominium that didn't appear on any of his firm's project listings. The more she watched, the more she realized how carefully he had built a life of lies. Her cameras picked up small but troubling details. Michael occasionally entered the garage carrying bags that he never brought back out. He spent hours in the home office at night, locking the door from the inside, something he'd never done before. She noticed him receiving packages labeled as architectural materials, but when she quietly opened one before he got home, she found a small metal case containing syringes, unmarked vials, and what looked like medical tools. She felt the edges of fear tightening around her. Dana had seen enough cases in her life to recognize when something had moved from suspicious to dangerous. But the worst part was not knowing the scale of what she had uncovered. Was he just cheating, running a scam? Or was it something far darker? Late one night, when Michael was asleep, she unlocked his office using a set of spare keys he didn't know she had. Inside, she found a locked drawer. She forced it open and discovered a small black case. Inside was a burner phone, turned off, and a USB flash drive. She pocketed both and returned to bed before he noticed. The next day, she took the USB to the precinct, but didn't plug it into any department system. Instead, she used an isolated laptop unconnected to the network. What she found made her skin crawl: blueprints, not of homes or buildings, but of structures designed underground, with rooms no larger than closets, each one windowless, soundproofed, and heavily reinforced. Some had chains attached to the walls. There were codes labeling the rooms: Unit A2, Unit B1. It looked more like a holding facility than any architectural project she'd ever seen. There were folders of photographs, images of young women in various states of fear or unconsciousness. Dana recognized at least one face from a missing persons alert she had seen months earlier. Her breath caught in her throat. This wasn't about cheating. It wasn't even about fraud. Something evil was happening. And Michael wasn't just involved. He might be at the center of it. That night, when he leaned over to kiss her goodnight, she didn't move. She kept her eyes open in the dark, staring at the ceiling again, fully aware now that she was living with a man she didn't know, and whatever he was hiding could destroy far more than just their marriage. Dana waited 3 days before opening the burner phone. She wore gloves, used a Faraday bag to shield it from signals, and turned it on inside an evidence room at a closed precinct station. The phone was stripped of anything personal, no contacts, no call logs, just one encrypted messaging app. Inside that app were brief, chilling conversations. Most of them were coded: dates, initials, strings of numbers that seemed meaningless at first. But when she cross-referenced the dates with local missing persons reports, a terrifying pattern emerged. Each set of numbers lined up with a woman who had disappeared within days of the message being sent. Some of them were never found. Others were written off as runaways or unresolved cases, buried in the system. Dana felt like she was peeling back a layer of her life she didn't know existed. The deeper she looked, the more it seemed like Michael had been operating something far more complex and disturbing than a secret affair. These weren't one-off crimes. They were organized, systematic, controlled. She noticed that each woman's case had a radius locations they were last seen, where they lived, worked, who they knew. She took all those details and plotted them on a digital map. They formed a pattern, a rough triangle stretching across 3 counties, with one common point at the center, a property listed under a shell corporation Dana had never heard of. She drove past the property without stopping, taking photos from a distance. It was a modest farmhouse set deep behind a line of tall trees, with no mailbox or signage. A dirt road led behind it, but from the main highway, the place looked abandoned. Still, the GPS tracker on Michael's car showed multiple visits there always. Late at night, never during the day. Her stomach turned when she noticed the timestamps matched the messages from the burner phone. That night, Dana returned home and opened the remaining contents of the USB. One file stood out, a folder named Project Hollow. Inside were floor plans, notes, and disturbing lists labeled cycle, rotation, and compliance. The plans showed underground spaces built for containment, not comfort. One of the notes read, 2-week reset protocol must erase. Signs of struggle, rotate scent markers, reset lighting intervals. Dana had handled cases involving trafficking and illegal detainment, but this level of precision, the cold efficiency of it, it pointed to someone deeply invested in control. What horrified her even more was the evidence of surveillance. Photos taken from inside bathrooms, locker rooms, and bedrooms, all candid, hidden cameras. These women were being watched long before they vanished. It meant Michael had been selecting victims carefully, maybe even grooming them from a distance. He wasn't just involved, he was orchestrating every move. The man she had kissed goodnight for 12 years was building cages underground. Her instincts screamed to bring in federal authorities, to hand everything over and disappear into the system. But she couldn't, not yet. If she made one wrong move, he would vanish. He had the money, the knowledge, and clearly, the network to disappear before anyone touched him. She needed to catch him in the act with enough evidence to shut down the entire operation. Anything less, and he'd walk free, dragging countless others with him. So she waited. For 2 more days, she acted like nothing had changed. She cooked dinner, asked about his work, even smiled at his stories. But inside, she was unraveling every piece of his double life. The cameras, the GPS logs, the fake identities used to purchase building materials, it all pointed to that farmhouse dot. And then, just before midnight on a Thursday, the tracker pinged again. Michael was heading to the property. Dana took her weapon, a flashlight, and a small body cam. She didn't call for backup. This wasn't just a case anymore. It was her life, her truth, and she had to see what was inside that house. What she found waiting below would haunt her forever. The drive to the farmhouse was silent, but Dana's thoughts were loud. Every second felt stretched thin, and the beam of her headlights cutting through the dark rural road felt like a warning instead of guidance. The farmhouse sat motionless under the moonlight, wrapped in stillness, its windows blacked out and lifeless. She parked far down the road, concealed her vehicle behind a line of trees, and approached on foot through the tall grass. Her heartbeat was steady, not from calm but from years of discipline that kicked in whenever she stepped into danger. She moved along the edge of the property, scanning for motion sensors or hidden cameras. There were none that she could detect. which only deepened her suspicion. A man as meticulous as Michael wouldn't leave a place like this unguarded unless the real secrets were buried out of sight. She crept to the back of the farmhouse and spotted a door leading into a basement. It was locked but old. With a silent tug from a small pry bar she carried, it clicked open. A narrow stairwell led down into darkness. The air was cool and heavy, smelling of bleach and rust. Her flashlight cut a narrow path as she descended. At the base was a concrete corridor lined with metal doors. Each one had a code lock and a viewing slit. Dana's breath caught as she peered into the first cell, empty, but not untouched. There was a cot with leather straps on each corner, a drain in the floor, and a small metal shelf with what looked like sedatives. The walls were padded, and the ceiling had faint scuff marks, as if someone had tried to claw their way out. Moved deeper into the corridor, passing rooms labeled with small metal plates, A1, A2, B1. Some were empty. One still had clothing piled in a corner. Another had chains hanging from the ceiling. Surveillance cameras blinked from corners of the rooms, connected to wires that led into a monitoring room at the end of the hall. There, Dana found a wall of screens, each with feeds from multiple hidden locations, hallways, exteriors, even bathrooms. Many screens were dark. Some showed looping footage. Others were static. But one was live. The screen showed a woman, early 20s, pale, unconscious, strapped to a gurney. A needle in her arm, machines beside her. She was in one of the rooms Dana hadn't checked yet. Her body stiffened. She turned to leave, to find the woman, but before she could move, she heard it. A soft metallic creak. Then a footstep. Michael stood at the corridor entrance. He wasn't surprised. He was calm, as if he had expected her all along. In his hand, he held a syringe. He didn't run, didn't raise his voice, just stared at her with that same smile he'd used every morning for the past 12 years. Dana didn't hesitate. She drew her weapon and pointed it at him, but her arms trembled not from fear, but from betrayal so deep it nearly cracked her ribs. Still, Michael moved closer. He raised the syringe slightly, like an offering or a warning. Dana warned him again, but he kept walking. And in that second, something inside her snapped. The years of trust, the weight of lies, the evidence of human suffering only feet away, all of it collided in one unbearable truth. He wasn't going to stop. And he had been willing to drug, manipulate, and possibly kill to keep his world intact. She fired. Then again, and again. 10 shots echoed through the hallway, each one sharp, final, and deliberate. Michael collapsed in the corridor, syringe falling from his hand. Dana stood frozen, the gun still aimed, her body refusing to move until the silence returned. For a long moment, there was nothing but the distant hum of machines and her ragged breathing. She called it in. Not as a police chief, not as a wife, but as the last witness to something no one else had seen. Something no one else would ever understand. When the first responders arrived, Dana was still standing over Michael's body, weapon lowered, but not yet holstered. Her eyes were locked on the dark hallway ahead, as if she were waiting for another threat to emerge. The officers didn't question her authority or her actions, not immediately. They knew her. She was the chief. But as they moved past her and began to clear the area, the reality of what they found spread like a cold wave through the unit. The underground rooms were real. The surveillance system was still recording. The restrained woman in the far room was alive, barely conscious, disoriented, but breathing. Emergency medical teams pulled her from the gurney and rushed her to safety. Over the next several hours, investigators uncovered more evidence than anyone expected. Journals, digital logs, video recordings cataloging each abduction and confinement. It was a system, twisted operation that had been running for years, perhaps even longer than Dana had known Michael. Word traveled fast. By morning, the scene was swarming with federal agents, forensic specialists, and media helicopters circling the remote property like vultures. Dana gave her statement, calm and composed, sticking to the facts. She provided the timeline, the evidence she had collected, the motive behind her independent investigation. She detailed every step from the first message on his phone to the final confrontation. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. But something in her had gone quiet. Internal affairs launched an immediate review. The shooting was ruled justified. Michael had posed a threat. The syringe he carried contained a paralytic agent. The rooms he had designed were unmistakably for imprisonment and abuse. Dana was cleared of wrongdoing. No charges were filed. But the decision didn't feel like relief. It felt like a technicality. The press spun the story into a frenzy. Headlines read, "Police Chief Ends Husband's Secret Horror House," and "Hero Cop Takes Down Serial Predator." Social media flooded with praise, theories, debates. Some called her a savior. Others questioned how she could have lived with him and not known sooner. In truth, Donna didn't have answers for either side. All she had was a deep, gnawing silence that no badge or press conference could erase. She resigned within a week, quietly, no ceremony, no farewell speech. She handed over her badge, cleaned out her office, and left the precinct through the back exit. Her house was sealed off by authorities as an active crime scene, so she stayed in a small rented cabin outside the city, alone. The investigation into Michael's network revealed connections to offshore accounts, shell companies, and anonymous online forums linked to human trafficking. Several accomplices were arrested: transporters, builders, brokers, but most of them claimed they never knew the full extent of the operation. Michael had hidden everything beneath layers of charm and manipulation, convincing each person they were just a cog in a vague, secretive project. The victims, those who were found, were placed in recovery programs. Many couldn't speak about what they had endured. Others had no memory at all. Dana never went back to law enforcement. She received job offers, consulting, advisory roles, turned them all down. In private, she tried to process the truth. The man she had loved, trusted, and built a life with had used that very trust as camouflage for monstrous crimes. The guilt of not seeing it sooner stayed with her, no matter how many people told her she had done the right thing in the end. Years later, she still replayed those final moments in the underground corridor, the look in his eyes, the way he stepped forward, the moment her world finally shattered into truth. 10 bullets had stopped a predator, but they hadn't erased the memories. They hadn't dulled the realization that sometimes evil doesn't wear a stranger's face. Sometimes it sleeps beside you, kisses your cheek, and calls itself home.